Well, welcome, everybody. We're so glad you're here attending the Leadership Advantage presented by Omnia and the ESI Retail Leadership Academy. Thank you for joining. We're going to start with some introductions. I'm joined here with Fleming Ford. So Fleming, go ahead and let the group know who you are. I think many of them already know you.
Well, thank you all for joining us. We're super excited to share this information with you. Again, my name is Fleming Ford, and I am a leadership coach and coach a lot of GMs on how to build and strengthen their culture, how to build their teams and engage the workforce so they can retain and get better performance out of their teams, and have really worked with the Omnia profiles for years as soon as I engaged with a new leadership team. So we thought it'd be a great idea to share with you how I work with the profiles to help my leaders that I'm working with kind of build up their teams. So excited to get going.
Great. And I'm Kether Snyder. I'm Chief Revenue Officer with the Omnia Group, and I'm fairly new to Omnia. I joined last February, right before the world shut down. And I have 25 years, though, in sales, marketing, client delivery, and it's always been in the people business. So I've been involved in a lot of learning and development and consulting with everything to do with people issues in my entire career. And I'm an assessment freak. Self-acclaimed. And so I was so excited when the Omnia Group asked me to join the team. And I really believe in the power of really understanding yourself and the people you work with. So this is one of my passions, and I'm excited to share it with you today, but also to have Fleming as my partner in this as the automotive expert on the call. So looking forward to it. Here's what we're going to do. We are, first of all, going to cover how to identify your style, and hopefully most of you have taken the assessment, it looks like. So we're going to walk through what it tells you about leadership, while we also talk about, leadership in general, best approaches to motivate, engage, and drive productivity. We're also going to cover how to hire and retain top talent so that you can build a strong team, and how to look at delegation and all sorts of things you need to do to help with your own capacity as a leader. We invite you to put questions or comments in the chat. So if you have your chat window open, it should be to the right of your screen. We would love to have this be interactive. We'll take questions throughout and at the end. And also, we encourage you to stay on all the way to the end, because we've got a special offer for those of you attending to get a deeper entry into the power of the Omnia assessments with some different options for you. So we'll take a look at those at the end of the webinar. So on to the show.
So our first question is how you define leadership. So I want you to answer this question in the chat. A good leader should always blank. And I'll give you a couple seconds to fill in. A good leader should always, and fill in what you believe. How you finish that sentence could reveal a lot about your leadership style. And we want to compare it to your assessments later to see how it compares with what drives you and what your strengths are. So in the comments below, just complete the sentence any way you see fit. And don't worry, there's no right answer. So, and by the end of the webinar, you'll have a much better understanding of your team, your leadership style, how to better communicate. So it'll be interesting to come back and see, how you answered that question. And so, okay, we'll give everybody about another minute. All right. So before we get into kind of looking into your answers, can we go to the next slide? I wanted to share with you how James McGregor Burns, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning leadership expert on transformational leadership, but this is how he defines leadership. So the leader creates an inspiring vision of the future, motivates and inspires people to engage with the vision, manages the delivery and execution of the vision, the tasks, the day-to-day work, and then coaches and builds a team so that it's more effective at achieving the vision. And so really understanding yourself and your people and their skills and their strengths can really help you really build that team up and get them motivated and inspired to hit the vision that you're casting. So one of the things that we always hear is that leadership is influence. nothing more, nothing less. And the reason that we say that is because, it's every person may lead. You may lead at home, you may lead the family, your church, without even having a title. It's your ability to influence other people to want to do more, be more, give more. And so your ability to communicate and connect and understand people is how you really grow your influence. And people, we all get the title. We just all don't always have the ability to lead. So your ability to influence people, get them engaged, motivate them, communicate with them, and get them to want to do their job versus forcing them to do their job just because of our paycheck changes the whole culture. And so, leadership is a journey. It's not a destination. So I hope you're all always working on your leadership skills and your capacity as a leader, because it makes your job a lot easier. But you didn't become a leader when you first got that promotion, right? If you can all recall when you had that first promotion and you were like, yes, I did it. Now I'm a leader. And unfortunately, no, you just had a position. You had a new title. Leading is something that we acquire over time. So it's the beginning when you get the position, and that's exciting. But really, this is an ongoing process to strive to always be changing and improving, learning new information, learning what your people need from you. So you no longer, you know, think about how you can get people to do things. You think about how you can inspire and grow and influence their behaviors. So, how I answered the question, a good leader should always, probably when I first started, probably sounded a lot more like a boss, like I need to get my agenda done. I need to reach my goals. It was very centered on my own needs and ability. And so how I've shifted over the years has really started to be a different way I would answer the question. A good leader should always. And I see a lot of you in the chat have already learned these lessons. So you're way ahead of where I was. But, the inspiring, the influencing, the leading by example, the modeling, the behavior are all parts of being a leader. And it's a very complicated position because people are complicated. And so the more we learn and the more capable we become at understanding ourselves, the more emotional intelligence, which is the number one thing that CEOs are looking for now in leaders, is your ability to figure people out and figure out how to get them to want to do things with extra discretionary effort. So I wanted to kind of start with a few ways that I misstepped as a leader and share with you how I think the Omnia assessment, and please, there's plenty of assessments if you're using one already in your stores or in your organizations. I just say pull them back out. And it's something I'm always looking at and pulling my GM. I'm like, what is their Omnia? What is their results? And that helps us coach and change how we're going to interact and deal with different situations. So the first thing that I really misstepped on is communicating to everyone the same way. So I did not ever adapt my style so that they could better hear me, or I didn't adapt my approach so that they could also feel like they were part of the conversation. Being an alpha person, I wanted direct. I wanted to get right to the facts. I didn't want people, telling me what to do. I wanted to figure it out. And so I wanted to be left alone. And so when I first became a leader, my communication style was just one track. So I really did not connect with so many people on my team by only talking in the way that I felt was best to communicate or how I wanted to be communicated to. So the very first thing that when I discovered Omnia, which I started using a long time ago, I think, goodness, I don't even want to say how old I was.
I was going to say how many years ago?
I think it was like 98. But it was so enlightening to me to look at my leadership style and then look at how I was miscommunicating to people on my team. So, for example, I have absolutely no attention to detail. And I really dropped the ball with a lot of people on my team by not giving them enough detail, by not giving them enough instruction and parameters around, how I would, want to work with them or what my expectations were of them or how I wanted projects done. I kind of just was too broad and too vague. And so a lot of times they got paralysis because they didn't know how to do it perfectly because I hadn't laid out what perfect looked like.
Mm-hmm.
So a great way to shift and connect, which is really your goal with communication, is to understand how the people on your team hear, communicate, and talk, and how they like to receive information. So the second misstep that I made, I think is that I didn't really grasp that everybody's motivated by different things. As much as I was motivated by straight commission, a lot of people that scared them to death, right? So it was exciting for me. Other people, it would just make them want to leave and quit the job, right? As much as I was motivated by a lot of public praise, some people did not want you to hold them up in the front of the room and talk about them and put the spotlight on them. So you can't always understand people and what motivates them until you really understands, what their strengths are, what their styles are. And you can sometimes figure this out if you're super intuitive and you've worked with your team for a while. But if you really think right now about how people respond differently to different motivations on your team, it's because they all have their own internal triggers. And it's our job as leaders to figure them out. It's not their job to figure us out. So learning how to use an assessment tool or the Omnia profile or just asking great questions of your team will help you really figure out what motivates them. What is their why? What drives them? And that's going to be different for everybody on your team. So,
Fleming, I love what you're sharing about your lessons learned. And I think one of the things that you said up front about is being able to learn constantly, and that we as leaders always should be looking at reflecting back on what we did and didn't do well and how we do better and how do we go to things like this to learn new tips and new strategies. And I just want to say thank you, because I think the fact that you're sharing, you're a leadership coach, so you should have it all figured out. But to talk about where you made missteps is also what I think is one of the fundamental traits of a leader, to be willing to be vulnerable and say, hey, I got that wrong, or I really screwed that up. I'm sorry. Really goes a long way. So I think it's great to share that and to be willing to be
powerful words as a leader. I'm sorry and thank you, right?
Right. Exactly.
And I think as we move into the next era of automotive, you're absolutely right. Being authentic, because so much is happening, and we're going to have to ask our employees to change, innovate, try new things that have never happened possibly in a dealership.
Right.
They're going to need to feel safe, and they're going to need to know that it's okay that sometimes we mess up, as long as we're all progressing forward. And so being vulnerable and showing that side as a leader also does help with motivation. Because they know that you see them and you believe in them. So Thank you so much, Keather. So the next area, as we're going through all my trials and tribulations, is I was a terrible delegator. First off, I somewhat felt uncomfortable asking people to do work. And it's kind of common amongst, novice leaders to believe that delegating tasks is a sign of weakness. Like, I can do it all. And so many times one of the first things I do with my GMs is like, let's write down where you're spending your time and what's really your job. Because sometimes we like to jump into what we used to be good at. I came up through sales. So jumping into the sales call, going out with my employees on their calls and closing the deal, that wasn't helping them. That was showing off, right? So I really needed to learn how to let them take the ball and run with it and then coach afterwards. I had to learn to delegate where they had their strengths, right? I had to ask them to step up and be all that they could be. So one of the things that I really learned when working with Omnia was to understand what the strengths are of my team so I can appropriately delegate the right things to the right people. One of them would be, I'm horrible with details. If any of you follow me on LinkedIn, or if you even probably noticed throughout the slide deck, if you're at all organized and perfect and really dot the I's and cross the T's, I'm terrible at it. So I always have to have somebody on my team to help me with that. And so learning to understand how to build your team based on the strengths you need and hire to that, and then also delegate people the work that they're going to really shine at. If you gave me a whole bunch of, even though I'm good at math, I hate doing it all day long, because it really takes a lot of precision and it takes a lot of detail in order to not miss and make any mistakes. So I'm comfortable now in my older years that I make a lot of mistakes in my emails and all of that, even though it drives some of my partners crazy because they're such perfectionists. So, Keather, have anything like that?
Oh, I was going to say I've got the same profile as Fleming, so you guys should have been flies on the wall watching us prepare for this today.
We were like, "Where's
So
our technical people?"
yeah,
So,
but also the point on delegation. One of the best pieces of advice I got when I first became a manager was from one of my bosses who said that in the beginning, just because of my personality, and he knew me well, he's like, you're going to want everybody on your team to get to the same results the same way you do. And being a good leader means, helping people get to the outcome, to the success, but being comfortable if they do it a little bit differently. And I think that's one of the other challenges of delegating is people might not do it exactly the way we would have wanted them to do it, but they still get to the same result.
and I think if you're thinking about people on your team, and if you're starting, I think we're all feeling a little bit flustered right now with the world opening back up, and we're still kind of working the way we did, and now we're entering back into, we were just at a trade show, and
Yeah.
like, how do we were just talking about how do we navigate all that? And so I always encourage leaders to, if anybody on your team has the capability or the capacity to do the job you're doing at least 80%, then you need to put it off your plate and start letting them grow into that role, because your job is to gain capacity by growing them and delegating to them, because it shows a sign of trust, which is really critical to building up that motivation. So
I think that's so key to growth too, because we can't grow our businesses if we're not growing that capacity. So I love that.
we all learned that. Yeah.
Yep.
And we can only all work. There's only so many hours of the day. So delegate. It builds your team and builds their motivation. So, okay. So we asked all of you to take the assessment. Whether or not you ever use an assessment again, I think you're going to find it so enlightening to understand yourself, and it will change not only how you communicate at work, how you delegate at work, how you motivate at work. It will change if any of you are parents. I mean, this changed how I talk and give directions and coach my kids, how I interact with my husband. I know when he's quiet, I need to just let him have his space. So this can be used across all aspects, personally and professionally. So I hope that, we're going to dive into now identifying your leadership style. So if you do have your assessment ready, go ahead and pull that out. And I wanted to cover a few things before Keather dived into the columns and understanding, is that you really need to understand you can't have all the strengths. None of us are, we're just not built to have these, all the strengths. Okay. But I think sometimes we feel like because our strengths are kind of our innate talent, it's kind of what we do naturally. We feel like sometimes we all want to focus on our weaknesses and fix them. And I want to just encourage you, people really take their talent for granted. It's an unfortunate truth that what comes easily, we kind of, we undervalue it. It's not hard won. And, I call it like the fallacy of ease. And we believe what comes easily must not be valuable. And this is the exact opposite of what Omnia really taught me to do. Is I didn't have to become super organized, and I didn't have to become more comfortable with routine. I had to use what was innately part of what my strengths were as a leader. And so when you really work on a strength and your natural strengths, they actually multiply. And that's where you get your real power and growth. Okay. So when we talk about what are your weaknesses, it's not for you to fix them. It's for you just to understand them, and then really spend most of your time and your energy and your job should be focused and utilizing what your natural strengths are. It's kind of like I was a finance and accounting major in college because I was good at math, and that seemed like a nice solid job. And I watched so many people go through this. Visionaries do not like to sit in a cubicle and do accounting work all day. They want to visit, they want to talk about the big picture, they want to talk about strategy. And so although I could do the skills of the job, I didn't fit with the job because it used all my weaknesses more often. And so thinking about how you can be the leader you want to be is really rely on your strengths and develop those. Those are your best opportunities to really grow quickly and to really become the leader that you were meant to be. And it also this is really about shifting how you interact and build relationships. So the more quickly you can identify other people's strengths and weaknesses, or what interests them and motivates them, it changes how you communicate and connect with everyone in your circle. So I think, Keather, are we going to jump into?
Yep, I'll jump into it.
Right.
So the Omnia assessment actually produces 17 different types of leadership styles. So this is a culmination of all of the data we've collected over the years and the different varieties and shapes and sizes that leaders come into. So it's very interesting. Of those of you who've taken the assessment already on the call today, we've got 6 different leadership styles represented for those of you who took it. And again, if you haven't taken it yet, you're welcome to do so. We can get you that information if you don't have it, and it should have come in your email registration invite and a follow-up email you got from our producer, Emma. So if you don't have it, let us know. But if for those of you who took it, we've got 6 different styles. We've got several visionaries, which is your more traditional leadership role. You've heard some of the ways that Fleming has already described herself. So many of you fit into that visionary leadership style, and we'll talk about what these variations mean. We also have 1 accommodator. We've got 2 assertive diplomats and a networker. So the group is well represented already of the 17 leadership styles. And I think the key to this as we dig into it is all of these are can be effective leaders, and we can all be effective leaders if we're open to feedback and learn from our mistakes and listen and follow other great leaders' advice. But we're all going to go about it a different way with our natural traits and tendencies. So the accommodator may just be more that. A person with an accommodator leadership style is going to be more accommodative, supportive in their work as a leader versus out front and having to be on the stage leading the cause. They're more helpful, supportive of their team. They're also very focused on details. So as Fleming said, her style is not to be as focused on details, neither is mine. An accommodating leader is.
I need to work with the accommodator.
Yes, they make great colleagues for us visionaries. And what's interesting is sometimes these leadership roles you do find go into certain types of leadership positions. So very interesting. You were talking about finance and accounting. You know, the head of finance, the head of accounting still has to have leadership traits and certain levels of assertiveness and big picture thinking, but they also have to have very good attention to detail.
And process and
exactly. And those leaders make great leaders of people who are similar in traits. So we've got someone on our team that's got a similar work style, and she would never want to manage salespeople because their level of assertiveness and fortitude and ability to deal with conflict so head on is so different than what that kind of style is. It's not that she couldn't do it, but it wouldn't be a pleasurable job for her every single day of the week. So, but she can well manage a group of people that do the same thing.
And I always find accommodators are such good modelers of the behavior.
Yes.
They like to be working with their team and out there with them and listening and helping improve and remove obstacles, because they really do want that team to move forward, but they're just such good models of how they want their team to work.
Yeah. And every single one of these leadership styles has some, like you said, very strong strengths very good strengths to them. And that's the key, is to focus and hone in on where those strengths are, because that's where your comfort level is. That's where you have less stress. The more you can be aligned to the requirements of your job every day. And like you said, don't put you on a seat all day looking at numbers. Let you be out in the environment. Let you be out talking to people. That's where you're going to get the most joy out of your job and probably be the most successful. So we'll dig into a little bit of what the assessment covers, and then we'll talk through a little bit more of the application for those of you who are listening in and took the assessment. So it basically comes down to 4 different personality dimensions, and they're measured across 8 columns. So in your report, you're going to see 8 columns, and each set of dimensions are opposites of each other. So if the taller one column gets in that dimension, the lower the other one's going to get. Some of you may see some data though that shows your columns are more equal, and that happens as well, where sometimes you're very similar in both ways. The first dimension that we cover is the level of assertiveness. These are columns 1 and 2, and this is an individual's drive to win, ambition level. Again, very assertive means you're willing to ask for the business, willing to close, handle conflict. A higher column 2 does not have that same level of assertiveness. They're more collaborative, supportive in nature, like to be part of a team versus the individual out front, and are for the winning cause.
And so it's interesting. A lot of times people will ask me here, they're like, if it's so high, is that like a really good strength? And I will tell you, and I can say this, and I want to do it now because the high column 1s can handle me criticizing them a little bit here. There's a lot of high column 1s in our industry, especially in, the variable. And because it's that, risk takers and competitive and grow, and they're very comfortable being part of those sales teams that are super competitive and really are kind of, push the boundaries, and they always want to be at the top of the leaderboard. But sometimes if it's so high as a column 1, it's sometimes a struggle to take, as some of you might have been the top producer because you had really high column 1s. It's sometimes hard to make that shift as a leader because you're so like eat my young to get ahead. Now all of a sudden you have to kind of have some column 2 and nurture a little bit. So be careful sometimes if you're looking at your team and you're thinking about who upcoming leaders are. Sometimes there's too much intensity to somebody's strength that it's hard for them to balance out how they're going to use that as a leader. And, a lot of very aggressive high column 1s, we have to kind of coach and work with them on how to take a milder approach sometimes, especially when they're dealing with people who have a high column 2. Which is going to be a lot of my service technicians, a lot of people who are in the office, a lot of people, my customer experience, people. So having a softer approach helps you connect if you're one of those really high column 1s. And 2s, if you're dealing with a high column 1, like you need to be more direct and get kind of right to the point because they aren't as much into like the whole kumbaya. They're like, what does this have to do with me? So you'll know a few of those in the dealership. So
absolutely. Well said about the leadership transition. I think that one of the important things when you move from individual contributor to a leader is you go from it being all about me to all about we. And it's a much different drive. So you got to keep that one in check. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
So dimension number 2 is the communication style. And there's also a degree of problem solving that comes into columns 3 and 4 and this communication dimension. So this is about how you prefer to interact and make decisions. So a high column 3 is much more driven and enjoys being out in the public. There's a networker personality leadership style that's in our types that we just covered on the previous slide. And usually those column 3s with a high column 3 would be a person who's a natural networker, loves to be out, loves to meet, never met a stranger. Everyone is their friend and easy to communicate with. A high column 4 is an individual who prefers to work more on their own, not be out in the public all the time, and prefers to make decisions based on facts and figures, whereas a column 3 would make decisions based on intuition, feeling, gut. What's the read of the room? How's everybody feeling? And I empath that, or I intuit in a way, where column 4 is just the facts. Give me the objective data, preferably before the meeting so I don't have to review it on the fly. I'd like to look through it, analyze it, process it, and then talk through it. And preferably, I'd rather give you my thoughts probably on an email than I would to have to talk about it in front of the group in the meeting. The column 3s talk more than we listen. I notice I did say we. I'm a high column 3. I love to go by my gut. I love to talk. So sometimes that column 3 again has to go into check, which is the really important thing about this personality is it's how we're wired. It's where we are in our natural resting state, I like to say, or how we're most likely to act under stress, but it doesn't mean it gives you a hall pass. So just because I'm a high column 3 doesn't mean I get away with leading the meeting and doing all the talking. So,
and I think this is such a great one to adjust if you want to have like a challenge after this webinar. This is the easiest one, I think, to see kind of like, if you think about who on your team are the talkers and the sharers and, love to go to the trade shows and, want to always be, starting a conversation and, if you're shifting to their style, giving them praise and recognition, putting them in the spotlight, asking them, a lot of questions and getting them to open up and, not over talking them. Is where they feel valued, because this isn't just about how you lead, it's about how you bring your team to feel motivated and valued. And then my high column fours, they want that specific feedback. They want to know, they don't want you to go like, wow, you did a great job. They're like, exactly how did I do a great job, right? And so, threes and fours, these are your easy shifts to communicate with and understand who on your team needs to hear you differently. I also want to encourage you, my high threes, you are not very good at interviewing. So,
so true. We talk more than we ask.
Yeah. So learning to have your question sets ready and make sure you stick to it and really listen, because you tend to go with your gut also in an interviewer. And some of those professional interviewer candidates that are really good at interviewing can sometimes flatter you, distract you, and get you to like them. And you tend to go with your gut during interviews. So I always that's why I think using an assessment of some format helps you really kind of check your gut. Yeah. Fours kind of are naturally good listeners and interview a little bit better.
Good point. The next dimension is pace and adaptability. And this is the degree of pace at which one chooses to work and their ability to deal with change, multiple priorities, multiple agenda items, versus being more methodical, liking to follow things through. A person with a high column 5 they think they can multitask very, very well. And they love to have a lot of plates spinning. If you have too high of a column 5, you just know a couple of those plates are certainly going to drop, or something's going to get sacrificed for it. But that's the level of pace at which they choose to work. Someone with a high column 6 is more likely to really be more methodical in their approach and attention to the focus of the work that needs to get done, and would prefer to do one thing really well all the way through. I like to say a high column 6 is really good at follow up and follow through. A high column 5 has a tendency to be, oh, bright, shiny penny, or did anybody see that squirrel? And they're off and running and completely forgetting yesterday's priority if they haven't set up some systems and found some ways to structure their follow-up and their to-do items.
And this is so you'll see, if you think about the store for all my dealers, this is where the front and the back somewhat disconnect. Because the fast paced of the, being on the sales floor and the go is what a lot of people shine in. And sometimes if you hire somebody who that overwhelms them, it's probably because they didn't have enough column 5. But when the column 5 people go to the back, to talk about a trade-in or to talk about, getting, a car ready for delivery, and they come at them with that crazy fast pace, and my technicians and my they're like, whoa, and they come across like that's just because it's disrupting their very well planned day, and they don't want to make a mistake on their thoroughness of, we want them to get their repair right the first time. So if you can teach your teams how to shift how they approach the different people, then we have better communication on your entire dealership. And I always say, I was just working with a GM this morning because we're making a bunch of changes to the service. They're adding some bays. They're adding a rental, piece to their, and so we had to tell, he told the service technicians about a month ago that this was coming, and we communicated it constantly so that they could kind of get ready for the change. And this is, I think, really critical right now with all the changes that have been happening. Just because you're fast paced, which a lot of you are in this call, doesn't mean that people can't change. It's just you have to give them more ample notice to absorb that the change is coming. So I think that will be really helpful when you're thinking about the high 6s, which are going to be your technicians a lot of times, your office people, your accounting, anybody where we need them to be thorough and get, kind of that consistent methodical work done.
Yeah. And that goes hand in hand nicely with the final personality dimension. And that's the need for structure, columns 7 and 8, and how people prefer to work and focus on their work. And we talked about this previously about attention to detail. Attention to detail really comes in with a high column 8. And it is someone who will make sure that every I is dotted and T is crossed and the words are spelled right and the numbers and decimals are all accurate and specific. Column 7 really doesn't see those details, just kind of glosses over, and 80% is good enough, and action speaks louder than words and all those things. So and that's why on your teams and in our dealerships and in our organizations, we need both. You need people with high 7 and you need people with 8. A person with a high column 7 can be faster at making decisions, comfortable and confident in their decisions, and have a high degree of resilience. So salespeople predominantly usually have a very strong 7 because they're independent thinkers. They're able to work on their own without much guidance, and they can make decisions on the fly, and they're hugely resilient so they can bounce back from hearing no. A person with a high attention to detail, which would be that high column 8, is a perfectionist. So the worst piece of information they can hear is that they got something wrong, or that somebody doesn't want to hear what they have to say, or that no. And that can send them on a real spiral without some coaching and support and reinforcement that what they're doing overall is all for good. So watch out for your column 8s if they have a bad day or suffer a loss, because they need some help in getting over it. And your high column 7s tend to sometimes get so over it, we don't look in the rearview mirror to think about what we did wrong or what could have been done better either. So,
and this is the one I talked about earlier that I was a big failure at, because being such a 7, I let my high column 8s just kind of float in the wind. And then I'm like, why didn't you get this done? And they're like, well, you didn't tell me exactly how you wanted me to do it. And I was like, what? And so when I learned to communicate differently with them so they can do their work perfectly, and they really want a lot more process. And I think if you're a general manager or a leader, and if you're a high 7, this is someplace you can get someone to help you put in better processes and instructions and directions and ways that the 8s can feel real comfortable within those boundaries following it. Eventually the 8s don't need you, but especially when you have new ones and they're learning the parameters of your store, they're learning the CRM systems and all that, they really need a lot more detail than us 7s naturally give. And vice versa, the 8s sometimes overmanage and want to check on everybody's work. And that can really derail a 7 because they don't feel trusted. So these are, again, just small tweaks that you can make to have better impact. So if you've ever been like, what did I say? Why are they so mad? It's usually because you triggered something that you don't get bothered by, but they get bothered by.
Very well said. So each of you should have gotten a report with your leadership style that came after you completed the assessment. And again, let us know if you did not receive that. And this is what the visual is going to look like on your first page. It's the columns that I just went through and the level of height to the degree to which your leadership style reflects. So take a look at your report if you can. And we were just thinking it'd be fun to do a little activity around that. And it's really how to identify your communication. If you think about, or if you look at your report and you look at what column is the very tallest on your report. So of the 8 columns, which one is the highest? On this example, they're all pretty even on the 1, 3, 5, 7, but usually they're not all even all the way across. So you should have one that's higher. Think about the one that is the direct opposite of that. So if it was a column 1, a column 2 would be the opposite of that. Same if you have a high column 8, the opposite would be the 7. Which opposite causes you the most challenge, or do you think would cause you the most challenge in communicating with? And put it in the chat for us, please.
It may be who's the most challenging on your team as you're thinking about them.
Yeah.
That person that you guys are just kind of always like butting heads. And this might make more sense to you now, why they frustrate you. That's probably the biggest thing I learned is like, oh, it has nothing to do with how they work. It's how they process how they work.
Or I've noticed they get frustrated with me. So
Me.
for mine is definitely the high column 8, and it's that very thing you said, with the detailed directions and guidance. I'm a painter, not a pointer, so I see the big picture. I paint it, and I'm like, okay, great. We're gonna do this webinar. We're gonna do it with all the automotive, clients that we have. Let's go ahead and get invites out. Well, who are we inviting? What's the, where do I get the list? How do I find the people? How are we getting Fleming's clients invited to the webinar? Those are all details. And if I can't provide those details, the person who wants and needs to do that work can get very frustrated.
That's a very good example. And then I also think, I used to have a sales assistant, and this can actually work both ways. When they know your leadership style, they can actually also make it not emotional. So this takes a lot of emotions out when they realize I'm not doing this because of a personal reason. It's just how I am. So my sales admin used to be like, I need to get on your calendar once a week so I can go through your schedule and figure out what I need to do. And that's what we came up with as a solution to help her do her job. And then, a thing she asked from me is like, I couldn't just come and say, hey, can you take care of this for me right now? And although I didn't mean right now, that's just how my approach was, because I was just go, go, go. The rest of my team all learned to say, hey, it's time to be nice again, because when I hit the best, my column 4 comes out. And I'm like, just very direct, get it done. I forget the nice part. And so teaching your team to communicate and use this common language takes away a lot of stress and uncertainty in our conversations. So some of you are talking a little bit about pace. That's really interesting. Are there any ideas on like how to deal with different paces?
It is hard, because those who want 100 things going on at once and love the volume of activity and even kind of get thrilled on that little bit of stress and tension of last minute deadlines, that really makes someone with a high column 6 struggle. And there can be some real conflict when that's happening. I think the key is honoring and respecting the differences and being willing to voice them, and priority setting is really key. I see the other, Troy mentioning people who struggle with big goals. And, high column 5, oh my gosh, there's no goal too big, no mountain too tall to climb. And yet someone with a higher column 6 would be like, why did we just change direction? I don't understand. Are we still going to do this project versus that project? And like you said, Fleming, they're not necessarily not able to come up or to handle a change, but they need time to process it. And they need advanced knowledge, not just a shifting gears, stop everything, drop what you're doing. Let's move over here now.
And hey, all crazy 5s, they'll get it done faster than you think anyway. You don't have to pressure them. They can't stand to leave things on their list, and they want to go home and get it done. So it's fine. No worries. I also want to tackle, just because this is such an alpha-dominated industry, the high column 1s, because I see a lot of you are saying, Troy, I see what you're saying. And Maria, it's like that dealing with the column 2s who maybe don't share your, big goals and your big drive, and you're like, let's conquer the world. And they're like, wait, is that realistic? Right. So we need 2s on our team because, well, frankly, they help our customers and they deliver that great experience, and they don't always need to be in charge. And so they are the backbone of all of our groups. But what's interesting is a lot of times as column 1s, we're like, don't realize how scary we are. I always, with my GMs, they're like, I have an open door policy. I'm like, you're scary. Your personality is scary. You're intimidating. And a lot of times we come across, especially if you're high 1 and 5, as too busy to interrupt. Maybe my stuff isn't important enough to bring to your attention because you just have so much on your plate, as Kether was talking about earlier. So make sure if you have 2s on your team that you're pulling them to you. It's not our employees' jobs to come to us. It's a leader's job to go to our employees and meet them where they're at. So recognizing sometimes that you're intimidating to a column 2, and pull them in and ask great questions. Tell me how I can help you. What's challenging you? What's your focus for the day? What's your big, like helping them open up to you. You will connect in a way you've never connected before.
Well said.
We kind of 5, 6, and 1s and 2s. communicating details. We totally have covered that. April, I'm with you. And so challenges routine. Oh, yes. We probably have that en masse in the automotive industry, which is why we all kind of all head in different directions. But having the right people on your team who can handle routine, who can do that and be really successful at it, we just need to learn how to deal with them, as we were talking about earlier. And that was a great description. So,
Yeah.
okay. So we've talked a lot about how you can grow and motivate your team by understanding them. And this isn't something you don't have to do an assessment if you know your team really well, and they're showing their true self to you and you've been with them for a while. This is sometimes easy to do. If they're big talkers, then you know they're threes. The hardest one for me to kind of figure out is sometimes high threes come across like high ones, but they're not. They're more twos. And so, Troy, when you were talking about like that, them not sharing, maybe they don't really have that column one. So we have to approach them differently to get them kind of bought into the Kool-Aid. But really understanding, if you watch people who maybe you get frustrated with because they don't finish everything, maybe it's because they're a high five and you need to have short-term goals for them instead of these long-term goals that they kind of end up procrastinating and getting distracted by other things. So if you think about where they frustrate you, if you think about how they do their work, if you think about how they approach their day, you can sometimes figure out some of these. Now, talking with them about it sometimes means they would want to see their own result. But it really does open up how to use the strengths on your team versus trying to put them all in a mold that we kind of have in our industry of, well, here's what you should do and here's how it should be done. And the more everybody uses their strengths, it just multiplies. And I mean by that is, if, as we talked about, those get to become bigger and bigger strengths. And so they produce more work. They're more motivated because they're doing what energizes them naturally. So instead of going home at the end of the day tired and drained, they go home energized. It's like we're putting fuel into the car. So great place to look at if somebody's not working out for you right now. Are they in the right role? Are you communicating with them correctly? Are you utilizing their strengths? So all of those areas will help you build a better team.
And I know hiring is such a challenge right now in this industry, and finding people is getting harder, it seems, every day. But the key really is also finding the right person for the right role. When you're asked, when they're in the right role, there was a stat that we pulled up recently that 46% of new hires fail in the first 18 months of being hired because they don't have that fit. And it's fit with the job requirements and fit with the culture they've been put in. So it's just something really to consider when we're putting people in the roles, to make sure that there is a match to that person's natural strengths. So they're successful, they're happy, they go home at night energized instead of feeling like they're in job jail and they're not doing you any service or themselves.
And I'll say probably one of the first things, that I do, and some of you I work with, and one of the first things I do is I assess my leaders that I'm coaching, and then I have them assess their team, because that's the quickest, fastest way for me to get them improvement is, do we have the right people on your team, or do we need to allocate their strengths somewhere else? And sometimes that might be allocate their strengths out to another company, but most of the time I want you to keep your people. And the biggest one I tend to see is salespeople who do not have that column 1 and column 7. So, but they might be very outgoing and charming, and they try so hard and they do the work and they have a good attitude. I just want to make sure I put them in the right role, but they're not comfortable pushing the deal. They're not comfortable closing the deal. And then they also feel really but sometimes they can feel really beat up with all the rejection we have to go through. And so sometimes that really helps lift up your sales team if we get the right people in that. And then sometimes we'll move those strengths that they have into other roles in the dealership. I'm all about keeping the good attitude and keeping the strengths on the team. And so making sure that you are hiring people not into something they're going to fail at. I think nothing feels worse as a leader is when you've made a bad hire and that person's trying, it's just not working out. It's probably the most heartbreaking part of what we do, is not letting people be their best selves. And sometimes it's like we feel like, oh, they're not motivated, they're not, they don't care. And it's actually sometimes we beat it out of them because we put them in the wrong role. So as leaders, you have to get really great at interviewing and getting the best candidates and assessing their fit. You can do that with an assessment for speed, or you can do it by asking really great questions and diving in and being quiet to really identify, is this going to be something they're going to soar at? Is this something that really fits their strengths? Because it's a very frustrating feeling to give it your all and just, it was the leader who put you in the wrong role. So I really always encourage everybody to take more time on the front end of your hiring. Then you won't have a lot of these frustrations that we've kind of been talking about.
Or the turnover that we talked about.
Oh yeah, we had no turnover in automotive, guys.
So we recommend, of course, using an assessment and doing really good interviewing. And Fleming and I can help you with both. One of the things that we've done at Omnia, with the help of Fleming through our partnership, is Omnia has created job benchmarks and targets, these profiles across 200 different jobs. And we have specific job roles for the automotive industry. And I know that we've got some people joining who are also from marine and RV. So I wanted to show that we've got those as well. So these are all the roles that we've created benchmarks for. So specific job targets to make it really easy to assess. And so when you use the assessment for a selection decision, this is the way the report would look. And this shows the person's profile in yellow against the benchmark for that job position in blue. And I think, Fleming, you wanted to say something about the BDC role versus the more pure sales role.
Yes. So one of the things I'm always encouraging, as we're building out our BDC, is sometimes I feel like that needs to be the feeder system for people who move to the floor. So the career path can really be, let's start them as internet sales, and they may trigger into sale, product delivery specialist and so forth, or they may go into service advisor role, depending on what their profile is. But whenever you hire into any role at an entry level point, at a beginner level, which we're gonna have to start doing more and more of, growing our own talent, I want you to get the right fit from the beginning. So still, even though they may not be closing the deal or necessarily selling at this point, they will be your future salespeople, right? And as the industry grows into maybe more of a one-person contact, make sure you're getting true salespeople. Make sure your service advisors are comfortable with the technical aspects of dealing with a technician, but also that, we're pushing business and helping people make decisions. And sometimes we have to make difficult phone calls as the service advisor. And I see so many of them avoid this because they don't have enough column one. And it causes a lot of customer angst. So there's a lot of places that you can use assessments to build your team, communicate your team, and build career paths and really get the right people in the door that you want to invest your time into training, and not try to, morph them into different roles. So hire from the very beginning. The receptionist, the valet, hire to the strengths that you need, and then we'll grow them and give them the skills they need without having to change who they are. So.
Great. So we're coming to the end of our time, and we'll get to the wrap up and the promotional offer. But one of the other things we wanted to mention is that Fleming and I would love to keep this conversation going. And we're going to be offering a series of these for automotive leaders. So we'd be curious to hear, are there other topics you'd like us to cover in future sessions? Please put that in the chat or pop us a message afterwards. We'd love to get your feedback on how this session went and other topics you'd like to hear from us.
And if there's anything
for those of you who
came up as like a frustration while we were talking, I'd love to hear that, because it's really your frustrations that, we want to help you impact so that everything runs more smoothly for you. So we'd love to hear what you guys are challenged with, or if we kind of briefly talked about a particular problem that you might want to dive into.
No, great. So then we wanted to extend an offer. Those of you who have joined us, who have been wonderful to listen in through the whole time, hopefully we've gotten your attention and you've enjoyed learning about yourself and your style. If you want to take this deeper, we are offering a promotion for those of you who are interested in going further with Omnia. We do offer an unlimited subscription package that goes on for a year to use the assessments for selection, hiring, development, internal promotion, and transition decisions. And so we will offer 5% off the subscription price if you contact us after this webinar. And that, just so you know, the base price of that starts at $750 and then goes up based on the size of your team. And then we've got a sales development bundle that you could use for development decisions of your existing sales team. With that, the value of that report is $60 per report if you bought it in a 10-pack. And we're throwing in a free leadership report so that you get a view of your entire team and what that looks like. We're also doing one for sales hiring. And with that hiring pack, you get that selection, that yellow report we just showed. And you would also get to use a development report for an existing hire or the person that you end up hiring. And then finally, we have one special bundle, which is a customized service. I sound like an infomercial, Fleming. But there's one special offer for anyone who's interested that comes up first, and that's an executive bundle. And this is a customized report. So we have professional analysts that handwrite assessments in a bit more detail. And if you bought a 5-pack of those, you could get an executive summary for your entire team. And this would work really well if you're a general manager, general sales manager. Look at your entire team and their profiles, and you would get all sorts of tips on what that team's comprised of, where you've got synergy, where you may have conflict, some guidance on how you coach and develop and get the most out of that team and communicate more effectively with them and lead in a way that's going to motivate them. So that's a really special offer that we hope someone takes us up advantage of.
No, and that's one of my favorite ones to use and sit with the team and talk with them about their results. And really, it brings down a lot of barriers. And, this is really about building up communication in your store with a common language. And some of it's going to be based on your personalities, your strengths, and understanding that about each other and how we communicate. But it's also about, other leadership languages that, we really want to dive into with this series so that we get consistent common ground with you and your leadership team so that we can really kind of raise the bar and take all of our leadership to the next level. So thank you guys so much for joining us. And we hope you got some valuable tips that you can implement right away. I always say, as soon as you get out of here, you learn more by practice. So if there's something that you want to go approach those, high column 6s with a different, more methodical pace of how you request things, if it's you want to give more detail and analytics to your high 8s, think about who you can go talk to right now that's is opposite on your team and just see how the communication can shift. And I love this quote from Simon Sinek, who, is the whole know your why. I always say know their why, because a boss has a title and a leader has the people.
Love it. Thank you all for joining us today. We'd love to keep the conversation going. We'd love to hear what else you're interested in talking about. And so we'll leave you with our contact info. And thank you again. I wish you all the best in putting it into action right away. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.